worrying, it never...
I'm delighted to welcome Laura Berry, who will be known to many of you as the lead genealogist for the hit BBC TV series, Who Do You Think You Are? Now, before TV beckoned, Laura was the editor of Your Family History magazine and has worked as a professional archive researcher for the past 10 years. Laura will explain how to get the most out of Findmypast's rich collection of 9 million historical British and Irish newspapers, covering 1710 to 1954. Laura?
Thank you, Josh. I think it has to be said that the British newspaper archive is one of the most exciting to be digitised in the most recent years. I mean, not only are census returns, parish registers, birth, marriage and death indexes really important for building your family tree, but newspapers really bring colour to your ancestors' lives in a way that very few other record sets can. And as you say, I mean, the figures are just staggering. So far we've got over 240 years worth of papers online, and they've been taken from 280 odd titles. We've got 9 million pages that are searchable, but over the next 7 years, we can expect to see up to 40 million pages be digitised. And there's a graph there that shows you sort of the rough period that we're looking at, and they tend to be concentrated in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. But from 1750, most of our major cities had at least one regional newspaper title. And over the course of the next 50 years, you find that there are several titles competing for business. So the aim of this project is really to make sure at least one title from each city is digitised, and that will give us nationwide coverage, so you should definitely find something. I mean, it's just completely revolutionised the way that you do research, because newspapers have always been important to family historians, but when you go into an archive and you're looking through original records or microfilm records, you tend to have to focus on a specific date. So you look for something that you know has already happened. So if you find a birth certificate or a marriage certificate, you might look around that time to see if you can find an announcement or an obituary if you have a death certificate. But really the digitisation and, more importantly, the indexing of these records has completely changed things, because you just find things you weren't expecting and you wouldn't have found otherwise because you just weren't looking for them. You might find that your ancestors were giving evidence at a criminal trial, or perhaps they were a victim, or they might have been even a perpetrator of a crime. And you know, it's not always salacious details. You might find something quite simple. So maybe they were involved in a property deal, or they might have been present at a political event or something like that. But all this information helps you to flesh out what they were doing and, you know, the kind of people that they were and what interested them. I find researching subjects like shipwrecks and divorce proceedings, and also inquests where other archive documentation might not survive anymore, that's what newspapers are really, really useful for. So there's a whole range of stuff that you might want to use them to find out more about your ancestry. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to have a look at the simple name search, which some of you might have tried already. And then we're going to have a look at how you can use the search filters to really hone in on what you're looking for if you're completely bombarded with results. We're also going to take a look at the keyword search, because you can use that as a completely standalone tool without looking for a name. And then lastly, we'll look at how to browse newspapers, which is what you would have done in the archives. And you might say, why would I want to do that when they've all been digitised? There's a number of reasons. I mean, it's useful just for sort of gaining an insight into what was going on in a local community. But also, I mean, these records have been digitised using optical character recognition, which is like an electronic indexing system, which is fantastic for getting everything online really quickly, but it's not 100% perfect. So you might think, oh, I didn't find that marriage of Mary Smith. Maybe it's because it's a really common name, and actually just browsing through the local newspaper will be a better way of finding it. So we'll look at how you can do that towards the end of the session. First of all, you need to find the newspaper collection. And to do that, if you go to the homepage and you hover over the Search Records tab, at the bottom there, you'll see a link to newspapers and periodicals. And that's really the best way to search this collection, because they have a dedicated search engine, and it's just much better than using the general search usually. So this is what you're going to be faced with. And you'll see there, we're going to start with this simple name search. And it's worth going back through your family tree and pulling out all of the sort of less common names that you can find. Just remind yourselves of all those different people that you forgot that you found years ago. Someone like Constance Mary Holly is quite a good name to search for. It's not too common. So when I tried that, I got just 5 hits, which is great, and they were all related to Constance's marriage in Oakhampton in 1909. And in particular, like the Western Times that you can see here dedicated a whole 3 columns of print to describing Constance's wedding, and you get loads of detail about what she was wearing and what the bridesmaids wore. And not only that, it also describes what her house looked like, because that's where the reception was held. So you get much more than you bargained for. And even better, I mean, we've got a photo there of the bride and groom, and I think that's what everybody really hopes to find when they're looking at newspaper reports. In fact, this particular paper was completely plastered in photographs of local events, and I loved this. They've got the baby show, a local baby show. You can see the winning mothers there with their beautiful babies on their laps. So that's what we're all hoping to find. You might not always be so lucky. You might find nothing at all when you put in an ancestor's name, and that could be, perhaps, their name was written as Miss Holly rather than, maybe their first name's not been mentioned at all, or maybe just their first initials were given instead of the full first name. In which case you can just leave that first name box blank and just put in a surname. And it's worth using the keyword search box as well to put in an occupation or a place that you know is associated with that family. And that might help you to gather results together. On the other hand, you might find you're completely bombarded with results doing that, and you've just got hundreds and hundreds that you could never read through. In which case you'll want to use the search filters, which you'll find in the left-hand panel. And there's a number of different ones that you can use there. I mean, I was chatting to a chap recently called Ewan Armstrong, and he won a Findmypast subscription recently. And he's really excited about using the newspaper collection because he's got a story in his family that one of his ancestors died during a plane crash in the 1930s. So he really wanted to try and prove this, find out whether it was true or not. So when he put in the name, which was Houston Anderson, you might think that's not too common, but obviously Houston is the name of a place and Anderson is a fairly common surname. He got hundreds of results. So the best thing for him to do was to use the date filter on the side there. And you'll see with each date range, it tells you in brackets how many articles have been found within that period. And in the 1930s, there were only about 39, so that's a bit more manageable. And you can also narrow it down by using a place or looking for a county or a particular newspaper title if that's what you're interested in. And at the very bottom, you'll see that you can look for article types. So if you're really interested in finding a birth, marriage or death announcement or an obituary, you can look for a family announcement. Equally, you can find advertisements. So if your family had a family business, then they might have advertised their products. And you can look for articles that are illustrated as well using this last filter. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind there as well, you can just clear a filter, so you can play around with them. You don't have to start the search again from scratch. And each different type of filter will bring up a different combination of results, so I would recommend playing around with those different search filters. So by doing this, Ewan was able to find that his ancestor was indeed killed during a test flight of a flying flea. And you might think, what is this flying flea? Flying flea was essentially a man-made flying machine. So yeah, he got all this information that he completely confirmed the family story and was quite an intriguing, it just made it sound completely crazy because about 6 people in the world had died from such incidents and Houston was the only person to have been killed in Britain. And this is probably the most information that Ewan's going to find out about this incident. So it was really worthwhile him going through the newspaper collection to see what was there. There might be occasions when you want to look for an event or a place rather than a person, in which case you can do that just by leaving the name searches blank and just use the keyword search box. And you can put in whatever you want in there and then use the date filters and so on to help narrow down what you're looking for. For example, when I was researching my own family history, I didn't really find anything for my particular ancestors' names. Maybe they were just a bit boring or the names are too common, I don't know. But I thought, okay, I'll try a different tact. I'll try putting in the village names where they lived. And I was really staggered by the amount of information I was able to uncover. Just by putting in Murrisk, which is where my grandfather is from in the west coast of Ireland, I was able to uncover so much more information about that area than I would have done by reading history books. Probably is worth mentioning at this point, if you are looking for Irish newspapers or Irish stories, you're better off looking at the Irish newspapers collection and you'll find that filter in the left-hand panel again. just select Irish newspapers instead of British newspapers. When I put in Murrisk, I got about 180 results, which was a few too many. So I tried Murrisk fisherman, because I knew my great-great-grandfather was a fisherman in Murrisk in the late 19th century. And only one result came up, but it has completely changed my perception of that side of the family. Although my ancestor wasn't mentioned by name, it just says Murrisk fisherman. It tells me that the Murrisk fishermen suffered extreme distress during the 1880s because they were hit by a really harsh famine. And I'd been completely unaware of this. I mean, I knew that Ireland had the Great Famine in the 1840s and 50s, but I hadn't really appreciated that 30 years later, they were in just as dire a situation. And then that made me want to know more. I mean, I read this one article about the distress in Westport, which is the biggest town next to Murrisk, and about how the Board of Guardians had gone out of their way to try and do something to relieve the misery of these Murrisk fishermen. And you can see that's my great-grandfather there on the end in happier times, I think, in the 20th century. But that's what was so fascinating about it. You know, I knew that this man was alive at that time, and it just seems incomprehensible that he wouldn't have been affected by these events. So to find out more, I decided I needed to browse the newspapers. And the best way to do that is if you leave all the search boxes blank, so leave the name search and the keyword search blank, go down to the filters again, and you'll see there filter by newspaper, so you can select the title that you're interested in. And then you want to filter by date, so you might have to click through a few times to get to the specific day that you're interested in. And you can order the results by date as well. And I mean, in this particular example, we're looking at the Poor Law Union's Gazette, which is one of my favourite papers that's available in the collection, because it gives you all the gossip about the men who ran off with their mistresses and the wives that had had enough of their family and their kids, and they run off with the bloke from next door. So to browse a paper like this, you use the blue buttons there to just flick through the pages as you would have done in the archives, or you can skip to a particular page number using the drop-down list at the top. And don't forget, if you find something that you really want to save, you can do that just by downloading the page. There's a button at the very top of the screen to let you do that. And you can print the page from the screen if you want to. So there, that really brings us to the end of our session, and I hope that it's helpful. It's only a brief introduction, but I hope it helps you to find more about your ancestry.
It's been wonderful, Laura. Thank you so much. I mean, so much amazing information about the newspaper collections that Findmypast has. So we have the questions are coming in right and left for you. And to start off, would you search for sort of obituaries in Cardiff, Wales, or in Ireland, and how far back might they go?
Well, they should go back to, I mean, the collection goes right the way back to the 1700s, but generally announcements of births, marriages and deaths, you probably won't find them that early on. They tend to be more sort of local news, political news in the earlier editions. But I would say, well, by the sort of mid-18th and later, 18th century and later on, you are going to get loads of different birth, marriage and death announcements and obituaries for people who you might think weren't that important, just people who were important in their local community, but not on a national level. So, as I said, to search for somebody in Ireland, you'd go and you'd select that Irish newspapers filter, and then you could just put in their name and use the article type as a filter to look for a family announcement. And if you wanted to find one in Wales, you'd go back and you'd look for the British newspapers filter, put in the name again, and use the family announcement, and also the date filters, because you should have a rough idea of when they died, so that will help you to find what you're looking for.
Wonderful. So next question. Was it common for newspapers back home to list members of the community that might have left for America? And is that newsworthy or worth pursuing as a clue in immigration records?
I would say, yeah, in some local newspapers they would have done. I haven't come across an awful lot of those myself. But yeah, probably immigration records are going to be a better bet for that kind of thing, rather than the newspapers. But I mean, it's worth giving it a go. You never know. All sorts of random stuff comes up in here. You find people mentioned in local fairs and things that you just think, why? Why is that newsworthy? So you may well find something.
And it's always worth a look, right? Now, one question we've had is, you talked about OCR in the beginning, the index of the newspapers, and regarding the older newspapers, they wanted to know, why is the OCR so garbled sometimes?
Yeah, it's just one of those technical hitches, I think, unfortunately, and it can be frustrating when you think, well, maybe that's why I haven't found what I'm looking for. But again, I think it's fantastic that you have got the facility to browse newspapers, because it gives you peace of mind. Like, it gives you the option to do what you would have done in the archive in the first place anyway, but the OCR is there as an added help. And I mean, it's just been fantastic for researching stories in everybody's family tree.
Yeah, and I know certainly sometimes even the paper that it was printed on, the quality and the type of text, all of that can impact OCR. So that's why the browsing tips you gave us are so wonderful to help with that, because it is possible to find it. It might take the browse, but it's a click, not necessarily a scroll through microfilm.
Exactly, and you don't have to travel all the way to the archive, so it's still saving you time.
Absolutely. So this customer is interested in a newspaper that's not yet available. So what they're wondering is, how can they find out if it's scheduled to be digitized?
Well, you'll have to keep tuned to Amy's British Newspaper Archive, which has lots of news about what's coming, and I know that they're definitely planning on focusing on the First World War period. They're also looking at putting some national papers online, because recently lots of regional papers have gone up there, but the Daily Mirror is now available for the war period. So yeah, there's lots in the pipeline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To find out what's coming, you can always follow the Facebook or Twitter feed or the blogs that Amy works so well to put together.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, well, that is all the questions we have time for. Thank you so much for all this information about newspapers.